Mind telling me what brings you out here tonight, sir? The officer asked. The old man gave a calm nod. Same thing I was doing half a century ago. Expecting anyone? No, he replied, but someone will show up soon enough. It was supposed to be a forgettable traffic stop. Two highway officers, an elderly rider, and a tail light struggling to stay alive on a lonely Arizona road. Nothing about it suggested anything unusual. Walter Granger, 78 and built like someone carved out of time, sat straight-backed on his weather-beaten 1962 Triumph Bonneville. The desert evening cast long shadows across the cracked asphalt. He hadn't been speeding. He wasn't swerving. The only issue was the faint blink of his rear light, just noticeable enough for the patrol car behind him to light up its sirens. Walter eased onto the gravel shoulder without complaint. His movements were practiced and unhurried, the kind you see in people who learned long ago to never give authorities a reason to get nervous. Officer Brinton climbed out of the cruiser first, adjusting his belt as his partner, Officer Leary, circled the back of the bike. "Evening, sir," Brinton said, lifting a hand. "Mind stepping off for a moment?" Walter switched off the engine, its rumble fading into the dry air. He removed his helmet slowly, revealing sun-beaten skin, short white hair, and a deep scar under his right eye. His expression was firm, but not unfriendly. "Something wrong?" he asked. "Just a busted tail light," Brinton replied. "Wanted to make sure you were aware." "This machine's older than most folks I meet," Walter said. Leary's eyes scanned the plates, the veteran sticker, the dusty duffel on the bike, and finally the worn 101st Airborne patch on Walter's jacket. Faded, but unmistakable. "You served?" Leary asked. "Long time ago," Walter said. "How long?" "Long enough." Brinton took the driver's license back to the cruiser. When he ran the name, the screen flashed clean. No tickets, no priors. But there was something else, an ancient military clearance tag sitting quietly in the system, like a ghost from another era. Back beside the bike, Leary tried to make conversation. "Riding to some event tonight?" "Veterans meet a few miles out," Walter said. "Funny," Leary added. "Don't see many vets your age riding alone." Walter didn't respond. He was staring out over the desert, jaw set, as if he could feel something approaching that no one else sensed. Miles away, the ground was already beginning to hum, too subtle for the officers to notice, but not for him. At the cruiser, Brinton was on the phone with dispatch. "Running a verification on a Walter Granger," he said. "Anything federal tied to his record?" There was typing on the other end, then silence. "Hold on," the dispatcher said. "Your guy is clear, but his name is linked to some very old files, Cold War era. Covert stuff. Not flagged, just unusual." Brinton looked back through the windshield at Walter, who stood perfectly still beside his bike, like a man waiting for something he already knew was coming. The dispatcher eventually answered again, though her tone carried uncertainty. "We can't verify everything, but there's something unusual. This man's clearance comes from an era before most files were digital. Old school, extremely high level." Brinton slowly lowered the phone, unsettled. That wasn't the kind of response a patrol officer expected. He disconnected the call and made his way back to Leary. Their eyes met, both sensing a shift. "What's up?" Leary asked. "We need to keep him here a bit longer," Brinton said quietly. "There's history attached to his name, and not the normal kind." Leary turned toward Walter, trying to keep it casual. "Sir, thanks for waiting. My partner's just double-checking a few things. We appreciate your patience. Mind staying with us a little longer?" Walter breathed out slowly, unfazed. "You fellas always do this much digging over a bad taillight." Leary hesitated, then asked, "Were you ever tied to any special operations groups?" A faint twitch crossed Walter's mouth. "Why?" "Because your name tripped some high-level security tags. Stuff we don't usually see." Walter held his gaze for several seconds. "Something stick with you, officer, whether you talk about them or not." Before either man could say more, the ground beneath them trembled, subtle but real. Leary blinked. "Did you feel that?" A growing cloud of dust rose from the southern stretch of highway, moving quickly. Brinton instinctively shifted his hand toward his belt. "What on earth?" Walter didn't even look. He reached into his jacket and pulled a small, worn photograph, holding it loosely in his hand. "Sir, please don't," Brenton began. "They're here," Walter said calmly. Moments later, the shapes of large vehicles came into view, armored, heavy, unmistakably military. Tires thundered against the pavement, and the cadence of disciplined boots followed soon after. The wind swept across the desert, tossing grit into the air as 3 Humvees rolled onto the shoulder. Behind them came 2 troop carriers packed with soldiers in full gear. And finally, a black, unmarked government SUV eased to a stop behind the patrol car. Brenton and Leary instinctively stepped back, more confused than threatened. Nothing about this felt like danger, but none of it felt normal either. The SUV's door opened. A sharply dressed officer stepped out, walking with the assurance of someone used to command. His nameplate, Ramirez. The insignia on his uniform, Captain. He didn't look at the patrol officers. He went straight to Walter. They held each other's gaze briefly before Ramirez spoke. "Sir." Walter gave a quiet, weighted reply. "Eli." Leary's eyes widened. "Wait, you two know each other?" Ramirez turned slightly. "Officers, thank you. We'll handle things from here." "With respect, Captain," Brennan said, "we need to know what's happening." Ramirez's voice stayed calm. "Relax. You're not in trouble. You did your jobs. What you didn't know," he glanced at Walter, "is that this man is the reason I'm alive." Brennan stared blankly. "What?" Ramirez continued. "My father told me the story my entire life. Laos, 72. Your unit wasn't supposed to be there, but you went anyway. You pulled 24 men out, including him. He said you walked through incoming fire like it had to ask permission to hit you." Walter's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "I remember the ridge. Your father took a round in the leg. I told him crawl or bleed. He crawled." Ramirez allowed himself a small smile. Then he signaled behind him. At once, more than 50 soldiers stepped out of the transports and formed a perfect line along the roadside. Their boots struck gravel in synchronized precision, silence filling the desert air. Brenton whispered, "What is this?" Ramirez answered without looking back. A gesture of respect, one he never asked for, but he earned. Walter adjusted the helmet under his arm. "This isn't necessary, Eli." "Yes, sir," Ramirez replied. "It is." A young private stepped forward carrying a folded American flag, held with 2 careful hands. He walked slowly, deliberately, like someone who instinctively understood the weight of the moment. Walter watched him approach, his face steady, but his eyes shifting, just barely. The private stopped in front of him and extended the flag. Walter didn't take it immediately. Ramirez stepped up beside the young soldier. "Private," Lawson spoke softly, "I want to carry it myself. My grandfather was one of the POWs you rescued in 72. I grew up hearing your name, memorized it like scripture." Walter finally reached for the folded flag, his hand steady. He held it close to his chest, eyes fixed on the blue triangle and white stars peeking from the folds. Officer Brenton remained silent. No words needed. Leary's head was bowed slightly, arms crossed over his vest. Not defensively, but in reverent respect. What had started as a routine stop had transformed into something far greater. Captain Ramirez scanned the line of soldiers. Over 50 rifles rose in unison, a formal salute, not to threaten, but to honor. The sharp, clean sound cut through the desert heat. At the center, Walter stood motionless, flag in hand, eyes fixed on a place only he could see. "You never wanted this," Ramirez whispered to him. "We did," Walter thought, keeping his gaze forward. It wasn't about words anymore. It was about time, silence, and honoring those who never returned. A breeze stirred sand across the highway, tugging gently at the flag. Ramirez signaled again, and a soldier began a soft, mournful rendition of taps. Walter closed his eyes and saw faces from decades past, names whispered that only he remembered. "We found their families," Ramirez said quietly. "Some didn't even know the truth, until now, because of you." Walter gripped the flag tighter, voice breaking for the first time that day. "I didn't save them all. You saved enough for us to be here," Ramirez replied. Then Walter stepped forward, offering the flag to the young private who had brought it. His hands were steady, but the gesture carried the weight of decades. "Keep it," Walter said. "You'll understand one day." The private hesitated, stunned, then accepted the flag with both hands. Walter turned slightly to Ramirez, eyes meeting the captain's. "You're Eli," he said. "Your dad, Julian, wore boots 2 sizes too small to hide the mistake. He never complained." "I limped for 4 days," Ramirez whispered back. Never said a word. Walter looked toward the desert again. "I didn't save your father out of orders," he said. "I did it because the ones before him would have done the same for me. That's the only code that mattered." Brinton cleared his throat. "Captain, can I ask something?" "Of course," Ramirez replied. "Why today? Why now?" Brinton asked, curiosity tinged with disbelief. "Did you track him? Set all this up? And why here on the side of a highway?" Ramirez glanced at Walter before answering. "He doesn't go to ceremonies. Doesn't accept awards. We tried 3 times to get him to official events. He never replied. Someone saw his name on a charity ride sign-up list. No press, no stage, just old motorcycles and older men riding in silence. That's the only way we knew he'd let us show our gratitude." Walter said nothing, merely staring ahead, accepting the temporary attention without complaint. Ramirez added, "He didn't want a tribute, but we needed one." Leary, quiet until now, asked, "So, what happens next?" "Nothing," Ramirez replied with a faint smile. "We return to base. He resumes his ride. Life continues as it always has. But some of us will sleep a little easier tonight, knowing we got to look him in the eye and say it." Walter's lips pressed thinly, and he offered a slight nod. Not pride, just understanding. Before leaving, Ramirez stepped closer. "I wanted to give you something." He reached into his inner jacket pocket and produced a sealed tan envelope. Unmarked, plain military issue. He handed it to Walter, who took it slowly, staring at it for a moment before sliding it into his saddlebag without opening it. Brinton and Leary watched silently, uncertain whether they had witnessed a reunion, a ceremony, or something in between. Ramirez, however, knew exactly what it was, a moment repaid. As engines roared back to life and soldiers returned to their transports, a small crowd on the opposite side of the road stirred. Someone in that group recognized Walter. A woman, likely in her early 60s, wearing jeans and a pale yellow shirt, stepped forward. She held her phone, though no longer recording, her face pale, mouth slightly open, still processing what she had just seen. Walter had not noticed her yet. He was still focused on Captain Ramirez, tightening his saddlebag straps, ready to move on. "Mr. Granger," the woman called, her voice soft but carrying over the hum of boots and engines. Walter turned, eyes narrowing. "I think you knew my brother," she said, stepping off the shoulder and slowly crossing the faded yellow lines. Her brother, Alan Forrester, a Navy pilot shot down in '71. Walter froze. She came closer. Brinton and Leary noted, her pace neither rushed nor hesitant. "They told us he died in the jungle. His body was never found. Just a single sentence in a report. Presumed dead behind enemy lines. That's all we got." The woman reached Walter, pausing directly in front of him. Her eyes were glossy, yet fixed on him. "My father went to his grave believing Alan had died alone. But 4 years ago, a man from the VA visited my mother and said someone had quietly ensured Alan made it home. Not in body, but in story. He said someone stayed behind to mark the trees so the retrieval team could find the site. That person never left a name." Walter did not blink. The woman reached into her purse and produced a folded piece of old paper. "Whoever it was, carved this into the bark," she said, handing it to Walter. The faded graphite read, "Forrester position marked, don't let him vanish." Walter accepted it in silence. Finally, with eyes that betrayed emotion, he whispered, "We made a promise. Never leave one behind." Her hands trembled. "That was you." Walter met her gaze. "It was all I could do. We didn't have time to pull him out, but I made sure someone would." She nodded, then, without hesitation, wrapped her arms around him. The hug wasn't dramatic or forced. It was years of silence finally finding shape. Walter didn't return it fully, but he didn't pull away either. His hand hovered near her back, resting gently above her shoulder before releasing. Ramirez cleared his throat and signaled the soldiers. "Company, attention!" The line snapped into formation. "Right face!" Boots crunched gravel as they turned. "Present arms!" Ramirez called. One final salute, clean, unified, sharp. Walter slowly raised his right hand to his brow. No hesitation, no struggle. For the first time in nearly 30 years, he saluted and held it. Private Lawson stepped forward again, flag in hand, clutching it tightly to his chest. The other soldiers remained at attention, some extending their salute a second longer than regulation. They weren't saluting rank or orders. They were saluting the man who never sought recognition, the man who did his duty and walked away. The sun sank further behind distant mountains, casting long shadows across the highway. Drivers who had stopped now stepped from their vehicles, hats removed, heads bowed. Nobody told them to, nobody needed to. Walter lowered his hand. Ramirez nodded once. "Order arms." Rifles lowered. A long silence followed. No one moved immediately, but it wasn't over. Ramirez had one final thing to say, something personal, something his father had always spoken of, and it was time Walter heard it from someone else. The convoy remained in place. Captain Ramirez lingered at Walter's side, scanning the road and the growing crowd on the opposite shoulder. Nearby, civilians lingered, some holding hands, others quietly dabbing at tears. None fully comprehended the gravity of what they had witnessed, yet each felt the weight of its significance. Ramirez cast a brief glance downward before meeting Walter's eyes. "My father never stopped speaking about you. Even in his final months, when he could barely recall his own birthday, he remembered your name." Walter shifted slightly, but said nothing. "He told me about a field," Ramirez continued, recounting the delayed extraction. "The jungle behind you was ablaze. All you had was a broken radio, 2 loaded clips, and 23 men ready to surrender." Walter's gaze remained steady. His voice, when it came, was quiet but firm. "We didn't give up." "I know," Ramirez replied. "He told me. You made them crawl the final mile on their stomachs to stay hidden. You sang, sir, to keep them calm." Walter raised an eyebrow. "That's classified." Ramirez let out a soft chuckle, his shoulders loosening for the first time that day. "I didn't believe it either, until he had me memorize the lyrics." Walter smiled faintly. "White Cliffs of Dover. That was the only song I knew. All the words." Ramirez stepped closer, lowering his voice. "He told me one more thing, just before he passed." Walter tilted his head slightly. "He said if he ever found me, he wanted to say the words he never got to speak. To look me in the eye and tell me, 'Mom, you didn't just save my life. You gave me everything that came after it.'" Walter stood motionless for a long moment, the weight of the words lingering, both crushing and ethereal. Brinton and Leary stayed nearby, silent, letting the moment unfold naturally. Finally, Walter swallowed. "Did your dad ever tell you I almost left him behind?" Ramirez blinked. "No." He passed out, shot in the thigh. "Shock hit. I looked at my team and hesitated, but you didn't leave him." Walter nodded slowly. "No, but I considered it." He scanned the soldiers, then the crowd, then returned his gaze to Ramirez. "You ever carry that weight, son? The ones you couldn't save scream louder than the ones you did." Ramirez paused, then said carefully, "I haven't endured what you did, but I bear my own weight. I just try not to let it crush me." Walter took that in. "That's good. That's what keeps men upright." A horn sounded in the distance, a transport driver signaling. Ramirez looked back, gestured with 2 fingers, and the convoy began to slowly reposition before departing. He reached into his pocket one final time and produced something small, worn, metal, and curved. He handed Walter a small, worn harmonica. Walter examined it quietly. "You gave him yours," Ramirez said. "Kept him sane when things got rough." Walter held it carefully, turning it over in his hands. "I didn't think he'd keep it," Ramirez continued. "He did. Carried it until the day he passed. Now it's yours again." Walter exhaled slowly, nodding once. "Tell your mom he turned out all right. I think she knows," Ramirez replied with a faint smile. The captain stepped back and offered a crisp salute. Not formal military, but something smaller, more personal. Walter didn't return the salute. Instead, he raised the harmonica in his hand. Ramirez got into his vehicle, the engines roaring to life. As the convoy began to move, Brinton approached. "Sir, I don't think I've ever seen anything like that." Walter shrugged, slipping the harmonica into his jacket pocket. "Neither have I." Leary stepped up beside him. "So now what? You heading to that benefit?" Walter nodded. "Yeah, someone's out to warn the young ones about riding with bald tires." Brinton chuckled. "Think they'll believe you?" "Nope," Walter replied. "But I'll try anyway." As Walter kicked his motorcycle to life and prepared to ride off, the cruiser's dash cam had already captured every moment. From the first blink of the police lights behind his bike to the final salute and slow departure of the military convoy into the desert sunset. At the station, an overnight clerk reviewed the footage as usual, scanning for incidents and checking timestamps. When the first Humvee appeared on screen, he paused, rewound, played again, and finally stopped. Without a word, he clipped a 47-second segment showing the soldiers lined up and uploaded it to a private Facebook group for first responders across the Southwest. By morning, it was everywhere. News outlets scrambled to verify the event. The Arizona State Police issued a statement just before 9 a.m., confirming it had occurred near Safford and that no violations or arrests were involved. They called it a spontaneous moment of recognition. No names, no details. Yet viewers were already asking, who was the man on the motorcycle? The original clip circulated widely, edited, reposted, and shared across TikTok and Instagram stories, often with dramatic music, slow zoom-ins, and hashtags like #RealHero and #DesertSalute. By the second afternoon, one YouTube video had surpassed 300,000 views. Its title read, "Cops pull over elderly man seconds later, 50 soldiers show up." Some thought it was staged. Others insisted it was part of a campaign ad. A few swore it was AI-generated, until Maria Forrester, the sister of the down pilot, posted a selfie from a scene. She shared her account, down to the folded paper and the carved words on the bark. Her post alone was shared nearly 40,000 times in just 2 days. By the third day, Walter's name had surfaced. A local veteran confirmed it, then another, and soon a former Army mechanic uploaded a faded photo of his father with a man who looked just like Walter. Only younger, thinner, standing before a jungle shack, mud on his face, fire in his eyes. Walter had lived decades in quiet anonymity. Now, strangers visited his diner in Bowie, leaving folded notes on his table or paying for coffee without a word. He didn't alter his routine. He still attended the ride the following weekend, parking in the back. When someone asked if he'd seen the viral video, he simply nodded and said, "Heard about it." Tess, the sharp-tongued waitress in her 50s, refilled his mug with a knowing look. "Gonna pretend you didn't go viral?" "I don't know what that means," he replied, eyes on his coffee. "It means people are crying over you in traffic on their lunch breaks." "They'll get over it," Walter said. Tess smirked. "Maybe, but you've got a letter from a senator and invites for 2 morning shows. They called here." "I don't own a cell phone," he said, "and that's not changing." She slid a white envelope across the table. "This one's from the boy, the one with the flag. Lawson says thank you. You gave him something he didn't know he needed." Walter tucked the envelope into his jacket, unopened. "Maybe I gave him something I didn't know I needed too," he murmured. Later, as he wheeled the Bonneville out of the garage, a group of teens waited outside the fence. 5 of them wearing old helmets, dusty boots, hopeful expressions. One called out, "Mr. Granger, you the one from the video?" Walter paused, walking the bike to the gate. "You here to ask questions?" "No, sir," the boy replied. "We were just wondering if you ever show people how to fix old bikes like that." Walter studied them for a long moment. Then he said, "I might, if you know how to listen." As the sun dipped behind the hills and the Bonneville rumbled to life, Walter wasn't thinking about views or headlines. He thought of the names he hadn't spoken in decades and how, somehow, they had finally been heard. It was quiet at the cemetery near Wilcox. No cars, just the wind brushing through faded flags and plastic flowers, the occasional creak of an old gate, and Walter's slow steps on the gravel. He carried no flag, no speech, no camera, just a small brown paper bag from a roadside bakery and the harmonica Captain Ramirez had returned to him days before, tucked in his jacket pocket like it had never left. He stopped before a worn headstone, Evelyn Granger. Beneath it, wife, teacher, gave everything without asking for credit. Didn't plan on visitors today, he murmured, setting the bag on the grass beside the grave. Inside was a single blueberry scone, Evelyn's favorite. He never brought flowers. Evelyn had joked that the only good flowers were the ones still growing. I had a strange week, he said, adjusting his jacket. Got pulled over. Tail light went out. Would have been just a ticket, but then the convoy showed up. 50 soldiers. Eli Ramirez. You remember Julian, don't you? Boy with the soft eyes, the limp. His son's a captain now. Said, I saved his father's life. Maybe I did. Walter lowered himself onto a nearby bench. The harmonica slid from his jacket into his lap. They gave me a flag, he said. I gave it away like it belonged somewhere else. But they also gave me something I didn't expect, something I thought I was done with. He paused. Gratitude. I used to think what we did should stay in the dark. Cleaner, safer, but maybe that was selfish. Maybe the stories should live, even if the men don't. He rubbed his thumb over the harmonica's grooves. A kid had come by the garage, wanting help fixing a busted old Yamaha. Couldn't have been more than 16. Reminded me of Ricky, always twisting wires the wrong way, but thinking he had it figured out. A breeze stirred the paper bag's edge. Walter leaned forward, placing the harmonica gently on the grave. You never liked it when I played this, he said. Always half a note off, but I'll leave it with you this time. He stood, stretching his knees. I'm not going to D.C. I know you'd say I should, that it'd be good for others, but I've done my part. Let someone else stand in front of the cameras. He gazed across the field, row after row of names. I'll keep writing. Maybe teach a few kids something while I'm still standing. Let them figure out what kind of men they want to be. He started to turn, then paused. Almost forgot, he said, pulling the tan envelope Ramirez had given him, the one he hadn't opened. He held it for a long moment, eyes scanning the crease, then silently laid it on the bench, leaving it unopened for someone else. Always is, he muttered. Agar Zolesa, Menses Uborgen Barcha, Matenlarni Berlestrub, Silik, Professional in Glitska, Hikoya Holodig. As the sun sank behind the hills once more, Walter swung his leg over the Bonneville and kicked the engine to life. It rattled and purred beneath him, steady as always, as he rolled back onto the highway. The paper bag still sat by the grave, the harmonica resting against the stone, the envelope untouched, waiting for hands that had yet to arrive. But Walter didn't look back. For the first time in a long while, he felt no obligation to anyone, not even to the past. The next morning, he was back in the garage, perched on an overturned milk crate, sleeves rolled up, grease smeared across his fingers like second nature. 3 kids were already there, one wrestling with a busted carburetor, another staring at a rusted tank beyond saving, and a third just watching, wide-eyed, without a bike of his own. First rule, Walter said, wiping his hands on a rag. Don't touch anything that smells like it's leaking or burning. That's not ambition, that's stupidity. The boys laughed. One of them, nervously, called him Sir. Walter gave a pointed look. Sir was the man who paid me to fix his truck and never came back. Just call me Walt. By noon, Moore had arrived. Moore, a local teacher, dropped off her nephew. A father from Tucson brought his teenage daughter after seeing the viral clip, hoping she'd learn something different than usual school lessons. Walter didn't mind. He still wouldn't talk about the war unless asked, and even then, only in fragments. The kids didn't push. They wanted to know how to weld a gas tank without losing eyebrows, or if a 1978 Yamaha was worth saving. He gave them space to figure out. For years, he had kept to himself, not because he hated the world, but because the world had little room for those who didn't seek attention, who didn't post, who remembered things they couldn't say. Now, for the first time, the silence around him wasn't empty. It was full of curious hands, grease-stained notebooks, and the sound of life moving forward, with him helping it along. One evening, Brendan stopped by in civilian clothes, holding a box of donuts like a peace offering. Walter looked at him over his glasses. "That's supposed to bribe me, not bribe me," Brenton said. Walter cracked a small smile. A week late. Better than never. They sat across from each other on the crates, each taking a donut. Nearby, the youngest kid, maybe 12, struggled with a bent clutch lever, trying not to break them out. Brenton watched and then leaned in. "You know, I've seen plenty of stunts go viral, flash mobs, burnouts, arguments, and none of them stick. But your story, it's still being shared." Walter chewed thoughtfully. "I didn't do anything." "You did more than you think," Brenton replied. Walter paused, then finally said, "If I'd known that stop would turn into all this, maybe I'd have fixed the taillight." Brenton laughed. "Think it would have stopped the captain?" "Probably not," Walter said. A quiet settled over the garage. Then Brenton asked, "Do you think we deserve that kind of respect?" Walter shook his head slowly. "That salute wasn't for me. It was for the ones who didn't come home. I just carried their names a little further." Brenton looked around at the group of kids. "And now you're passing them on." Walter didn't answer. He didn't have to, because sometimes legacy isn't built with speeches, medals, or marble statues. Sometimes it's built on the side of a highway, boots crunching gravel, a story caught on camera. Sometimes it's in the hands of kids learning to fix something broken. Sometimes it's in slow, quiet conversations between strangers. For Walter Granger, that was enough. He didn't need a plaque. He had a garage, grease under his nails, and peace. If this story moves you, take a moment to think of the people in your life who've carried more than they let on. And if you haven't yet said thank you, you might be surprised at the doors it opens.